The Dictator Who Lost Control on Live TV, Romania, 1989. In the final days of the Cold War, as communist governments across Eastern Europe began to weaken, one country reached a breaking point that stunned the world. Romania, once promised stability and equality after World War II, had become a place defined by fear, silence, and hardship. For more than 2 decades, power rested in the hands of a single man, Nicolae Ceausescu. What followed in December 1989 was not just the collapse of a regime, but one of the most extraordinary and unsettling moments ever broadcast on television. A dictator who had ruled through total control was suddenly exposed, tried, and removed from power in a matter of days. Tonight, we examine how Romania reached that moment. This is not only the story of a leader's rise and fall, but of a society pushed beyond endurance, and what happens when fear finally gives way to defiance. That image was reinforced in 1968 when he publicly condemned the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. This rare act of defiance against Moscow earned him praise from Western governments. Romania gained access to favorable trade agreements, loans, and diplomatic recognition. But while the outside world viewed him as a reformer, inside the country, Ceausescu used this international support to tighten his grip on power. By the early 1970s, Romania shifted sharply toward extreme centralization. After visiting China and North Korea, Ceausescu returned deeply impressed by the total control exercised by their leaders. He introduced the so-called July Theses, expanding censorship, ideological education, and state control over culture. Independent thought was no longer tolerated. At the same time, Ceausescu elevated his wife, Elena, rapidly through the political system. Despite limited education and experience, she was promoted into senior leadership roles. Together, they built an overwhelming personality cult. School children memorized poems praising them. Media portrayed the couple as national heroes. Loyalty was no longer optional. It was required for survival. The foundation of this system was the Securite, Romania's secret police. By the late 1970s, it employed tens of thousands of officers and relied on hundreds of thousands of informants. In a country of just over 20 million people, nearly anyone could be watching. Neighbors, co-workers, even family members could report each other. Conversations grew cautious. Many people avoided speaking freely, even inside their own homes. Cultural life was tightly restricted. Foreign films and music were banned or heavily edited. Western books disappeared from libraries. Television broadcasting was reduced to just a few hours per day, much of it dedicated to state speeches and propaganda. Newspapers existed only to praise leadership. Religious institutions were monitored, relocated, or demolished, especially in Bucharest, where entire neighborhoods were cleared for redevelopment. Ceausescu launched massive construction projects meant to symbolize national strength. The most infamous was the People's Palace, one of the largest administrative buildings in the world. To make room for it, historic districts were erased and tens of thousands of residents displaced. While the project consumed enormous resources, ordinary Romanians struggled to secure basic necessities. By the early 1980s, Romania faced a severe economic crisis. Ceausescu had borrowed heavily from Western lenders during the previous decade to industrialize the country. When global conditions shifted and factories underperformed, debt mounted. His response was drastic. Eliminate all foreign debt as quickly as possible, regardless of the cost. The burden fell entirely on the population. Food production was redirected for export. Domestic shelves emptied. Meat, sugar, flour, and cooking oil were rationed. People waited in long lines for hours, often leaving with nothing. Electricity and heating were strictly limited, even during harsh winters. Apartments became dangerously cold. Elevators stopped working. Light bulbs were restricted to low wattage. Hospitals suffered severe shortages. Medical supplies were limited. Equipment broke down. Malnutrition increased, especially among children and pregnant women. Infant mortality rates rose sharply, placing Romania among the worst in Europe by the mid-1980s. Meanwhile, the political elite continued living comfortably, supplied by special stores closed to the public. Fear kept open resistance rare. Listening to foreign radio broadcasts became one of the few ways people accessed uncensored information. Stations like Radio Free Europe and the BBC were quietly tuned in at night, despite the risks. Underground materials circulated among students and intellectuals. Slowly, awareness grew that Romania's suffering was not shared by its neighbors. In November 1987, frustration erupted in the industrial city of Brașov. Factory workers protested shortages and working conditions, tearing down party slogans and demanding change. The regime suppressed the unrest, detaining organizers and dispersing families across the country. But the event revealed that fear was no longer absolute. By December 1989, pressure across Romania had reached a breaking point. The spark came in Timișoara, where authorities attempted to silence a dissenting pastor. When parishioners formed a human chain in response, crowds grew rapidly. What began as a local protest transformed into open defiance. Security forces responded with force. News spread quickly through whispers, handwritten notes, and phone calls. Instead of restoring control, the response ignited nationwide outrage. Ceausescu, away on a state visit, ordered suppression from afar, unaware that his authority was slipping away. On December 21st, he attempted to reassert control with a massive rally in Bucharest, broadcast live on television. For the first time in decades, the crowd turned against him. Confusion spread across the square and across the country, as viewers watched his confidence collapse in real time. That night, protests exploded in major cities. By the morning of December 22nd, the Romanian army withdrew its support for the regime. Soldiers joined civilians in the streets. Units refused orders to confront demonstrators. Ceausescu's power evaporated almost instantly. Attempting to flee, Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu were detained by military units outside Bucharest. They were held in isolation as a provisional government formed. Concerned about instability and the risk of rescue attempts, authorities moved quickly. On December 25th, a military tribunal convened. The trial was brief, improvised, and deeply controversial. Evidence was limited, defense was minimal. The outcome was decided in advance. Within an hour, both were sentenced. Shortly afterward, the sentence was carried out. The event was recorded and later broadcast, marking one of the most dramatic endings of a dictatorship ever shown on television. Across the world, viewers witnessed the sudden collapse of a regime that had ruled through fear for nearly a quarter century. Romania entered an uncertain future. The Communist Party dissolved almost overnight. New leadership promised reform, but many feared continuity beneath new names. Investigations followed, revealing confusion, unresolved responsibility, and unanswered questions that still echo today. The execution marked the end of one of Europe's most isolated regimes. Yet it also raised enduring questions about justice, accountability, and the cost of absolute power. For many Romanians, December 1989 remains both a moment of liberation and a reminder of how fragile freedom can be. Each year, the country remembers those who lost their lives during the uprising, not only as victims of a system, but as symbols of what happens when silence finally breaks. History does not end when a ruler falls. It continues in how a society chooses to remember and rebuild.